Hello and welcome to another episode of Speed Bumps here with Charlie Kimball. Today, I have the honor of introducing Miss Becky Furuta, a visionary leader and passionate advocate. Becky embarked on a journey inspired by her passion for riding bikes, and it has evolved and changed from there. Little did she know that this passion would serve as a guiding light, helping her overcome numerous challenges and speed bumps along the way, including diabetes, navigating motherhood while managing the condition, and confronting the shadows of depression stemming from childhood trauma. Armed with a master's degree in public health policy from the University of Colorado in Boulder, she channeled her skills and energy into advocating for children, mothers, families, and underserved communities. Becky understands that strong communities build strong individuals who in turn create even stronger communities. And that truly resonates with me. Becky's the owner and sports vision specialist at Avenue Vision, where she not only provides expert care, but also helps offer free eye care for those in need twice a year, demonstrating her continued commitment to community service. Her dedication to mental health is evident through her involvement with Go for Graham, a grassroots movement of athletes inspired by the idea that physical activity goes hand in hand with mental well-being. Go for Graham aims to improve mental health awareness and raise funds for the University of Colorado Depression Center, providing no-cost therapy for those in need. Through her work with Go for Graham, Becky found options to manage her own PTSD and is committed to showing others that help is available and there is always a way forward. Becky's advocacy extends beyond her businesses. She's a dedicated member of Moms Rising Together, an organization advocating for economic security for all mothers, women, and families across the United States. As a passionate advocate for childhood anti-obesity and public health campaigns, she uses her voice to drive meaningful change in the nutrition of children in schools. Now, her contributions on the bicycle and to cycling are equally impressive. As an ambassador for Team Novo Nordisk, which is where I came across her path, and a healthcare policy consultant, she set records and achieved remarkable feats, including a sixth-place finish in the 2017 Colorado State Time Trial Championship and another sixth-place finish in the Women's Professional Criterium, or CRIT, at the 2018 Colorado Classic. She's now moved into competitive running, and we'll talk about that transition, as well as I've seen lots of endeavors on cross-country skis in her native Colorado. And yet her impact isn't just here in the US, it's global. She spoke at an event at the United Nations, sharing her insights and experiences around Global Bike Day, as well as just this last year at European Parliament, talking about improved access and universal testing for diabetes. Despite her numerous community commitments, she's a devoted mother of 2 kids and 1 dog, motivated by the consequences of her actions and driven by a powerful belief that if you know what you want, be willing to do the hard work, you can get there. She's a true inspiration, demonstrating with passion, hard work, opportunity, and community, the possibilities are limitless. Please join me in welcoming Becky Furuta. I am fortunate to call her a friend, and I cannot wait to hear about her journeys in cycling. So Becky, thanks for joining us here on Speed Bumps.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. You and I haven't actually seen each other in person in a while, so it's really cool to be able to catch up with you and do this at the same time.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And all right, so I'm going to dive right in. What got you into cycling originally? Where did that passion come from, and why? How did you find that you enjoyed it so much?
So it wasn't an intentional path. I think like a lot of American kids, I didn't even really recognize that cycling was a sport per se. Like people rode their bikes for fun and people rode their bikes for transportation, but I'd never actually seen a bike race. I started riding my bike when I was about 14 years old. My parents had lost everything they'd ever worked for. My mother was 44, 48 when she became pregnant with my youngest sister, which was unexpected. It wasn't planned. And she had a myriad of health conditions. She had type 2 diabetes. She also had obesity. She was obese from a very, very young age. Like my earliest photos of her, she was already clinically obese by any kind of medical standard. She had high cholesterol. I mean, it was a very complex pregnancy. And because she realized she was pregnant relatively late into the pregnancy, it became even more complicated. She delivered my youngest sister prematurely, very prematurely, and it was a medical crisis. It was an emergency cesarean section. My youngest sister had to be taken to a children's hospital in Denver for emergency health care. She was there for about 3 months. And in the process of all of that, my parents literally became destitute almost overnight. My dad had a very successful business. He had always earned a very high income, but this was pre-ACA. So my mother couldn't get health insurance because of all of her conditions. And as a result, my parents were saddled with medical bills into the millions. My father, who I have to say, I mean, he said, absolutely not. I'm not going to declare bankruptcy. I'm not going to leave anyone holding the bag. No matter what, we're going to pay off all this debt. And that commitment was honorable, but it also came with a big financial cost to the family. And so we ended up homeless in a motel on the western slope of Colorado in a very tiny town. It's Ridgway, Colorado. At the time, I think it only had one paved street. I think now most of them are paved, but back then it was one paved street, one stop sign. It's where they filmed The True Grit with John Wayne. So it has a very, Western feel still to this day, a very rural, small town. And we were staying in a motel called the Will Rogers Motel there. And my sisters and I were not enrolled in school. My dad didn't know ultimately where he would land. So we were just kind of hanging out. It was myself and my older sister. I had a younger sister who was 7 years younger. And then this infant who was on a heart rate monitor and was very, very sick. And all of us were crammed into one motel room with 2 beds. And that, for a long time, was like my whole world. Those walls were the sum of my existence. I was in a town where I didn't know anybody, didn't have any friends. And so I started riding my bike just for something to do and to get out of that motel. And, my parents were definitely struggling emotionally. It was a really hard time for the family. And I just couldn't get up every day and sit in that room with all that sadness and all that depression and nothing to do. And so I'd wake up, ride my bike, and just keep on riding all day long. I would actually go up to this place called Orchard Mesa where they grow stone fruit for fruit wines. And I would just steal fruit. I would steal like peaches and cherries off the trees and shove them in my pockets and just ride my bike and eat stolen fruit all day long. And what could have been truly a crisis point in my life, what could have been a really terrible, awful experience, actually turned into this amazing adventure. And I fell in love with being on the bike. I fell in love with that independence. It empowered me. I would deal with all of these like kind of small scale issues. Like, what do you do when you have a flat tire? What do you do if you break a spoke? And working through those actually felt very empowering to me, realizing that I was competent, I was capable, and I could handle even small problems in my life. When there were these big problems that I could do nothing about, that gave me a sense of power and control. And I just never stopped riding. I didn't get a driver's license until I was 26, which is funny talking to you, somebody who drives for a living. You would not want me behind the wheel of your race car. I'm a terrible driver. But I just loved being on the bike. And from there, it transitioned to racing. Eventually, racing brought me college scholarships, and it also brought me a lot of esteem. I went from being the poor kid. People would see my address. I mean, when I was in school, they knew I was living in a motel, and the expectations shifted for me. People didn't expect the same things from me. They didn't expect the same kind of academic work. They didn't expect the same kind of involvement in school. And so, sports was one area where I could excel, and people just kept raising the bar. Instead of lowering it, they were raising it. And yeah, I just loved it.
It's incredible to go from sort of 4 small walls with 6 people and 2 beds to finding the whole world essentially to explore on a bicycle and be able to go out and ride all day. And I completely connect with that idea of overcoming those tiny challenges, right? The small things that you can control. How do I fix a flat tire? How do I repair a spoke or replace a spoke? How do I figure out where to go from? Like, how do I get up this mountain? How do I get back down? Make sure my brakes are working. All those little things that give you that sense of control and empowerment in that moment. Like you say, there were so many big problems that you couldn't do anything about. but these little ones that gave you the ability. And then, okay, so you found cycling. It's, you've fallen in love with that endeavor and that athleticism. What does that look like going to college, and where does your type 1 diagnosis, your diabetes story come on board with that?
Yeah, so I finished college, got my degree, got married. I was actually pregnant with my first child and went out on a training ride. I had signed a contract in 2005 for a domestic elite racing team. I actually had my choice between, a well-paying career in public health or a career as a bike racer. My parents were very heavily leaning toward the career in public health, but I chose the career as a bike racer. I think my landlord was probably leaning heavily toward the career in public health too, but so I chose the bike racing career, and so I was racing for a team, living my dream. I mean, I thought this was it. I went from when I was a kid racing a bike, I couldn't afford a $10,000 road bike. I was racing on borrowed bikes, which oftentimes weren't my size. They weren't adjusted to me. They didn't fit me properly. Nobody wants to loan you their nicest bike, so they were usually acceptable but not great bikes. And all of a sudden I signed this contract. I have this great bike. I have this beautiful kit that I'm not paying for. I have all of the devices, everything I need to be able to really do well and perform at my peak. And one day I went out for a training ride, which should have been super easy. Just an easy coffee shop ride. And I just could not hang on. I was struggling from the first pedal stroke. I had no energy. I had no power. I felt terrible. And about 15 minutes into the ride, I cut it. I was like, this is just not my day. I'm going home. Rode home. And the whole time I knew something was wrong. I mean, consciously, I was like, this isn't right. Like something is physically wrong with me. But I was also newly pregnant, right? First pregnancy. So I was like, well, maybe I'm overreacting. I got home. And I was so thirsty, I grabbed a 20-ounce water bottle, filled it up, drank an entire bottle of water, filled it up a second time, drank 20 more ounces of water. And I was going to fill it up a third time when, my rational brain kicked in. And of course, I have this background in public health. I also have a family history of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And I realized immediately that I had diabetes. I looked at my husband and I was like, I've got diabetes. And he said, no, you don't. It's probably fine. You're probably just having a day. And I was like, no. I called my midwife and she told me to come in the next morning and have a fasting glucose check. And she said, well, it would be really early in pregnancy to screen for gestational diabetes, which is pregnancy-induced diabetes. She said, that's probably not the case. There's probably something else going on. I think she was thinking I had an infection. I went in.
Right.
They did that fasting blood glucose test. The first thing they did actually was a ketone test. They had me pee on a ketone stick, and that stick turned black. And
Wow.
I remember handing it to the medical assistant, and she looked at me, and I mean, I could see her face. She had a very, very strong reaction. And she said, I've never seen this before. And if you were ever in a healthcare setting and somebody says to you, I've never seen this before, it is not going to be followed by, you're fine, go home. Like that's not good news. So I kind of knew that something was definitely wrong. And then my fasting blood sugar was in the 500s. And that's
Wow.
when they said, yeah, for sure, you have diabetes.
And for our audience that maybe doesn't know the numbers kind of as intimately as we do, people without diabetes, you could go drink a 6-pack of Coke and eat a dozen donuts. Not that I'm recommending this at all, but your blood sugar would never really go above 120 or 150. Normal ranges are 70 to 100, and your body naturally does a really good job of regulating those numbers. To see numbers in the 500s, that means something is clearly wrong. I've never seen this before. Like you said, it's not, I've never seen this before. You're fine. It's, I've never seen this before. We've got a problem. And so when that number comes
Yeah.
up in the 500s, it's like, okay, so where do we go from here? So not only at that moment were you learning and managing your first pregnancy as a professional athlete at that time, you then had to take on the additional load of learning, understanding, and figuring out how to continue that path with diabetes. What were the first steps, and where'd your mindset go to, I can do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to climb that hill, I'm going to get back on that bike, I'm going to get through this? Or was it, all right, I'm done. I got to go, hang up my bike?
I am really lucky. My grandmother had type 1 diabetes, and she was an incredible woman. My daughter's actually named after her. She was just an incredible woman. She traveled the whole world. She had type 1 diabetes, never let it stop her from doing anything. And she was very meticulous. She was meticulous about her diabetes management at a time in history when we didn't have the tools that we now have. She had to weigh all of her food on a food scale. She had to measure everything very precisely. She was taking these older insulin formulations that didn't work as well, so she had to eat at an exact schedule, but she did it. And as a result, she was actually an incredibly healthy, very active woman who just didn't, I don't think anything stopped her from doing what she wanted. That was just kind of who she was. And loved adventure novels. Like, when she was dying, actually, her last probably 2 months of life, I would go and read her books by like crack hour and these crazy just adventure stories, because that was her personality. So it never actually occurred to me that this would be a problem for me in the context of sport. I knew I was going to have to change some things. I knew it was something I was going to have to proactively manage just from watching her. And from watching my own mother, who was on the other end of the spectrum, right? Like, she had this completely uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. My mother, if she was in a normal blood glucose range, thought she was dying because she was so used to being so high. She felt terrible all the time. And so I knew that those were my options and that I wanted to lean in the direction of my grandmother. So I actually felt pretty good about it. And to be honest with you, when they diagnosed me, it was a little reassuring because I knew something was wrong. And I was grateful that it was something that I knew about and that I understood and had some kind of background in. Um, the actual process of managing it, however, is a very different story, as you know. Like, that was filled initially with a lot of frustration. Um, you don't realize how much sugar is in so many foods until you're measuring your blood glucose all the time. Like, I remember the first time I had Chinese food and I was like, why is my blood sugar this high? And there's all of these like hidden carbohydrates in some of those foods. Like, I wasn't eating rice. I was eating, a high protein dish, but the sauce had so much sugar in it. So, you very quickly learn a lot about food and nutrition. And my sister, my older sister, who's very type A, brought me all of these books and recipe books and guidelines and everything. And then I found a great doctor who actually specialized in pregnancy and diabetes, and his outcomes for women with diabetes were the same as pregnancy outcomes in the US for women without diabetes, which was
Oh,
super
wow.
reassuring to me. Yeah. And he encouraged me to keep riding. He was like, stay on the bike, go be active. Like, this is the best thing for you.
Well, so firstly, your grandmother is an incredible role model to be like, okay, that's what I want. I don't want this to slow me now, and I don't want this to get in the way. And then to find a doctor whose health outcomes are equal to having diabetes or not in pregnancy gave you the sort of healthcare professional to lean on and ask those questions, and the fact that he leaned into you cycling and staying active, to help lean on that. And as a funny aside about hidden sugars and things like that, early on I was like, man, I was keeping food logs and I was going over it with my endocrinologist, and I was like, I like these 5 meals. I have no idea why I ended up high. Like, and I'm the son of an engineer, right? So to me, 1 plus 1 always equals 2. And I joke that in diabetes, sometimes 1 plus 1 equals banana. It just sometimes it feels
Yeah.
completely disconnected from any, as you say, type A, linear thought process. And she looks down and she goes, well, you didn't account for corn. I go, corn's a vegetable. It doesn't have carbohydrates in it. She goes, well, yeah, it does. And it's like that education still continues, right? You never stop learning. And one of the things that I've noticed, at least over the last 5 years, is how much age changes that management process. I turn 40 next year, and it's like, okay, that piece of it is evolving continually, and I'm having to adjust and relearn about my diabetes. And I talk about it like it's my own, it's got a personality here and just kind of hangs out with me, because I feel like some days it's just angry at me and nothing works. And then 2 days later, I'll wake up with a cold and be like, oh, that's what was going on. But going back to that sort of pregnancy, and you're continuing to ride, what happened with that professional contract? Did they obviously knew you were pregnant. Where did your career go from there on the bike and off the bike within public health? We talked about all the community work. Where did you go from there after that diagnosis?
Yeah, so I didn't tell them while I was pregnant. For the remainder of the season, I didn't let anyone know that I had diabetes. In fact, I was a closet diabetic for a long time. Like I was very, very quiet about, my old business partner, we had worked together for 2 years before he knew I had type 1 diabetes. I was very apprehensive to talk about it. So I didn't tell my teammates. I didn't tell the organization that was sponsoring me. I just waited to have the baby. I had a perfectly healthy pregnancy, I should say. Baby was born just fine. Baby just graduated high school last weekend. So it all turned out. But yeah. And then the start of the next season, we had to undergo a physical. You go in for a physical at the beginning of every season. And they saw on my physical form the diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. And they terminated my contract immediately.
Really?
It was that said.
Just no question.
They called me up and they said, we feel like this is a liability. We are not prepared to manage it. Our soigneurs are not prepared to make special meals. And I was like, I don't need special meals. And they had no understanding of it. They didn't have any interest in learning about the condition. And they felt like they could just find another writer. So they let me go. And I mean, it was definitely, it was a heartbreaking moment for me because I've been living my dream, right? Like this was my dream and I was there and now it's just evaporated due to something outside of my control. At the same time, I did have an infant at home. So in some ways I was like, well, maybe this is the best thing. I can just refocus my energy on public health and my business. I can, fully dedicate myself to raising this tiny person and keeping them alive. And, I just kind of shelved the idea of making a return to professional cycling. I still rode. I still rode every single day. I still trained, not like I was training when I was racing, but I still got on the bike pretty much every day. But yeah, I'd kind of given up the idea of ever having another professional cycling career until I went to my endocrinologist's office a couple of years later. And I saw a magazine on the table that talked about this team of athletes, 6 of whom had type 1 diabetes. It was Team Type 1, which was the predecessor to Team Novo Nordisk, who I'm part of now. And I was fascinated. I was like, how are these 6 people doing it? I've just been told, like, by this professional organization that I'm too much of a liability. How did these guys get contracts with these people and what's going on? And so I reached out to them to get some information, both on management in sport, diabetes management in sport, and nutrition and that kind of coaching, but also just to see, how they were able to secure those contracts. And that's when I learned that the founder of the team had type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed at 6 months of age. And this was part of a bigger mission to spread awareness and empower people with the condition.
It gives me goosebumps, Becky, to just walk into a doctor's office and see a magazine and be like, okay, these guys are changing the paradigm, changing the conversation for professional athletes with diabetes, and be like, okay, I just want to keep learning. For you to say, okay, I let me get some more education so I can be healthier and be a better athlete, professional or otherwise. And then understanding that it is about raising awareness and about spreading empowerment within the diabetes community. It gave me goosebumps. So you reach out to them and where does it go from there?
And they sent me a ticket to training camp. They were like, let's talk in person. Come be part of the team. Like, you've got a good race resume. Let's do it. And so I showed up in Tucson, Arizona for their team training camp. I actually got off the plane and there's this fleet of cars because this is not a domestic elite cycling team. This is actually a UCI pro continental team. So that's, the second step from World Tour. So the guys you see racing at the Tour de France, these guys are racing a lot of those athletes. This is one step from the very top of the sport. And so, there's this whole machine behind them. There's all these team cars and people. Some of the riders were people that, I had watched on TV. I'd watched these guys race on TV and I knew who they were. And to be standing in an elevator with them on our way to dinner, it was completely overwhelming. Like I was like, I was like a kid in an elevator with Taylor Swift. Like I had no ability to even speak. I just kind of walked along with what was going on. And at dinner, we were all sitting there, and all of a sudden, there's this table full of people checking their blood sugar and giving themselves insulin, and being open about it, not hiding it, because I was so used to being like this closeted diabetic. And it was just an incredible experience. Like I knew that's where I was supposed to be. I was less convinced my first race. My first race, actually, with the team, I crashed about 400 meters from the start, and I think I finished like third to last. It was horrible. It was a horrible debut. But it got better as time went on. And I mean, it's a steep learning curve, but eventually I wound up there, racing with some of the top people in the sport.
Wow, to go from somewhere where you hid having diabetes, you didn't talk about it, you didn't share with it. When it came out because you had to disclose it on a physical, they just canceled your agreement and fired you essentially as a liability, to going to this dinner with some of your cycling heroes or idols, and you sit down and there's a whole table of people talking about managing their blood sugar. What a different viewpoint, right? What a different perspective. And you and I have both spoken at diabetes camps over the course of our ambassador work. And I always found it really interesting and empowering when all of these young people with diabetes go, yeah, I love coming to camp because everybody's like me. All of a sudden, I'm not an outlier. People without diabetes are the outlier here at camp. In fact, there was this boy comes up and introduces himself and he goes, oh, hi, my name's Nani. I go, Nani, that's kind of a weird name. He goes, no, it's actually Jim, but I don't have diabetes, so everyone calls me Nani because I'm the non-diabetic here, right? Like, so he was the weird one because he didn't have diabetes, and so you go to this dinner, and you're riding alongside these idols, and yet you're part of this group that is embracing diabetes and empowering that community. Um, other than crashing in your first race, what speed bumps, what hurdles came up that you weren't expecting? Sort of silent speed bumps, right? Things that maybe other people didn't see, and you go, "Oh man, this is harder than I thought it was going to be in this process of raising awareness and empowering the diabetes community."
Oh my gosh. I mean, there have been tons of them. Eventually Team Type 1 became Team Novo Nordisk. All of us now everyone on the team now has type 1 diabetes. That was one of the requirements that the sponsor put in place. And so all of our professional athletes all over the world have type 1 diabetes. The first year that the sponsorship changed and it became Team Novo Nordisk, there was a list of women who were slated to be on the pro team and a list of women who didn't make it. And I had really good, minus my crashing and my horrible first debut race, I had some pretty solid race results behind me and one of the stronger resumes. But, I was a little bit older than some of the other girls. I was pushing 30 at that time, which seems young to me now, but, in cycling, that's not. And so I did not make that pro team roster. And I remember, that knee-jerk reaction to quit, to just, again, like just walk away from it. But I decided that I was just going to really dedicate myself to proving that I deserved to be there. And I was just going to, go all in and do the work and be the kind of athlete that the team needed. And eventually I worked my way back up to that pro roster. I mean, I've been with the team now since 2010. So that's a very long stint in this sport, much longer than what most people have. But yeah, I mean, it took some persistence and it took some, kind of willingness to shelve your ego and just do the hard work. One of the greatest moments for me actually was when, one of the directors for the team, Vasily Davydenko, who's, this former Russian Olympian, an incredible athlete, a great guy, just an absolutely phenomenal coach. He said to me one day, Becky, you're a really good teammate. And Voss does not give out compliments easily. Like, you have to earn those. And it was the best compliment you can have. You're part of a team, and helping to support other people is such a critical piece of that. But it was also just something that, he's not going to give that to you, right? Like, you have to earn that. And so, I mean, I think for me that at the time when I didn't make that roster, it was really painful. But now, having stuck it out and earned my way through is a tremendous source of pride. So, and then, yeah, in my personal life, I mean, I've been through, my son has autism. That was a really, really tough, tough diagnosis, and we weren't sure what his future would look like. And, when he was young, he didn't speak until he was about 5 or 6. And I remember when he was little, wondering if I'd ever hear him say, I love you. Um, and, now he's 18 and he's headed off to college and he's doing great. But, yeah, I mean, there were some really, I think all parents can relate to that. There are some hard times when you're raising little people. It can be tough.
And do you think your diabetes journey gave you a little extra preparation for handling that challenge of raising a child with autism? Like, do you think they're obviously not the like distinct health management techniques, but the mindset perspective, right? This is something, okay, we're going to learn about this. We're going to figure out what it means. And we're going to like work together as a family and doctors and nurses and organizations and find as much help. Do you think that that helped, or was it so different that you're like, these lessons are very different?
I mean, I think I definitely think it helped me. I do have an understanding at this point in my life that everybody gets something. Everybody has some kind of hardship or challenge or something that they're going to have to get over. But I actually really think the person that helped most is my son, Henry. I tell this story about him when he must have been 7 or 8. He was little. And we were at USA Pro Challenge, and it was my teammate at the time, Javier Mejia's last race, final race. And he's racing with Jens Voigt. Jens was retiring that year. So it was Jens' last race as well. And Javi and Jens are in the break, and they're going lap after lap after lap, just these two riders. And Henry loved Javi. Javi was his favorite rider on the team. And so Henry's out there right up on that gate, banging on that gate, screaming, "Go, Javi." Like, he's never cheered for me like this in any race ever, but he is screaming his head off for Javi. And race gets done. I take him over to the team cars and to the bus so he can say hi to everybody. And the CEO of the team is bending down, trying to chat with Henry. And Henry wants none of it. One thing about having a child with autism is they're not so good with those social graces. They're going to tell you exactly how it is. And Henry looked at the CEO, my boss, and said, "I just want to see Javi. Where's Javi?" And Phil very graciously goes into the bus and pulls out Javi. And Javi hands Henry his race numbers. And Henry went home and he pinned those numbers on his backpack. And he had those numbers on his backpack for years, for probably 2 or 3 years. And when people would ask him why he had those numbers on his backpack, he would say, "Well, if Javi can race with diabetes, I can do what I want with autism." He had this incredible group of role models overcoming challenges every single day, every time they got on the bike. And I think he just grew up with the mindset that that's what people do. Like, that was what was modeled for him his whole life.
Wow. That's incredible. And what a great a perspective from Henry, a young Henry, but also from Javi and from Phil, the CEO at the time, to be like, this is what we do. We overcome these challenges, and part of why we do this is to show the next generation and show other people, if it's diabetes or otherwise, that they can overcome those challenges with hard work and determination and the right mindset and that the mental health support. And that's amazing. Absolutely incredible story. So now you're running, you're cross country skiing. Like, is that just a natural maturation of a professional cyclist career, or what got you into that?
I mean, I'm not a planner. I just kind of like let things organically unfold. What actually happened was COVID. COVID, world goes into lockdown, and all of a sudden my house is my office, my husband at the time's office, our kids' school, right? It's our entertainment. And it's also, April in Colorado and still snowing. And so if I wanted to cycle, it was going to be my gym. And the idea of having every part of my life indoors in my living room was just too much. And so I decided that I needed some kind of activity that I could do outside, away from my house during lockdown. And I started running for that reason. And I got pretty good at it. Like I was just signing up for races just because there was no cycling. I mean, cycling, the world of cycling stopped. And so there was still a handful of running races. So I'd sign up for these running races and I'd just go out and kind of mess around. And my friends were like, what would happen if you actually dedicated yourself to this? Like if you had a training plan and you actually tried, like what would happen? I was like, oh, I don't know. And so I did and won my first race, like outright won it. And I was like, man, this is maybe a little bit more fun than I thought. And I'm going to turn 46 in 3 weeks. I've been in the sport of professional cycling for basically my entire adult life. So it's like, I can't even count how many thousands of miles I've raced at this point. I'm not getting faster at this point in my life. Like the best is behind me. I do accept my athletic best in the sport of cycling is past, and there's nothing I'm going to do better that I haven't already done, when I was younger. And so in some ways, the lure of that just isn't there anymore. But in running, I ran competitively my freshman year of high school, and that was the last time. And there's so much progression for me. And every time I go out and race, I find myself developing new strategies and, my technique's improving and my results are improving. In 2019, I actually qualified for USA Track and Field Nationals in the 6K cross country. And it was the hardest race of my entire life. I can honestly say that 6K race is probably the hardest race I've ever done on the bike, off the bike, anywhere. So yeah, there's just a lot of room for me to kind of move. And then, yeah, I took up cross country skiing because again, that's an activity like, all the lift lines in Colorado were closed due to COVID. So I was like, well, I'll just go in the woods and cross country ski, which is something that I'd done as a kid. And fell back in love with it. Novo actually took me out to Sweden and had me do the Vasaloppet, which is the biggest cross-country ski race in the world. It's 90 kilometers. And I mean, yeah, I've just had so much fun doing all of these other things that I just didn't have time for when cycling was my whole life.
Okay, so 6K cross country run, hardest race you've ever done. What's the longest bike race you've done? Just for reference, be like, okay, this 6K running race was one of the hardest things you've ever done. But like cycling, you did 30 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles in a day.
Oh, I mean, yeah, most women's professional races are between 65 and 70 miles a day. We did race across Utah one year, which was, 580 miles of consecutive cycling. Like, yeah, I mean, just constant riding a bike.
So
Yeah.
4 miles of running cross country was the hardest race you've ever done. And you have done over 500 miles consecutive cycling on a bike. So running sounds way harder than cycling. If you look at those just pure numbers, but again, it's not exactly linear. My brain's linear, but it's not exactly linear. I understand the growth potential, right?
I mean, I think it's just because it was something that, yeah. Yeah, it was like something new. And I have to tell you, that's kind of so this race, I'm like a half mile in. I can actually tell you, I know when I looked down at my Garmin, I was like, I can't sustain this. I'm going to die here. And it was 0.49 miles. Like it was under a half mile. And I was like, I'm going to, like, they better have a defibrillator because I'm not going to make it. And I was committed. I mean, I was like, I want to finish this in the top 20. And which was just like a crazy goal for somebody who does it. I mean, for a new runner to expect to finish a national championship in the top 20, like it was ridiculous. But at the 1 mile mark, just started, I had to start pulling back because I was in so much pain at 1 mile. And this guy comes running up next to me and he lifts up his shirt, flashes a continuous glucose monitor. So obviously someone with diabetes. And he's like, you've got to go. You're wearing a jersey that says changing diabetes. Get out there and go change it. And this guy just starts yelling at me while he's running next to me on the course, like, outside of the barriers. And it actually lit a fire under me. I mean, he was like, you need to remember why you're here. You got to go. And when I crossed the finish line, and I think this is like the analogy for life, right? Like, you will not cross the finish lines of hard things in your life based on your ego or your training or what you want to have happen or what you've dreamt of. It takes some kind of purpose to get you across that finish line. And that guy running next to me reminded me of my purpose. And that was the only reason I lit up the last 2 miles after he was screaming at me. I mean, I was like, if I die here, I'm going to die, but I'm going to do the best I can. And I think I finished like 42nd, which out of, 136 runners isn't terrible, but not the result I wanted, but I would not have finished. I mean, I was seriously in my head fighting the urge to walk off the course and just call it a day. That guy kept me in that race. And it wasn't just that guy. It was that sense of like what we talked about, the sense of purpose, right?
Did you ever find him afterwards? Did he come up to you at all? Did you ever have any follow-up conversations with him?
I did. Well, he was about to race. He was racing one of the amateur races later in the day. So I didn't want to, like overwhelm him while he's trying to do his race prep. But yeah, I went up and like the first thing I did, I crossed the finish line and I didn't say anything to my friends or my family who were there watching. I went and found this guy, gave him a huge hug. And that's what I said to him. I was like, you got me across that finish line. And he said the same thing. He said, no, I didn't. I didn't get you across the finish line. Your legs, your lungs, and your drive and the reason that you're out here, that's what got you across the finish line. I just reminded you of why you were here. And yeah, I mean, all the time, that sense of purpose, right? Like when things get hard, you will quit if there's not a reason, if you don't have a real reason to do it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know that I can ask much more than that. So on Speed Bumps, I'm going to ask the same 3 questions to every guest. I'm a car guy, so there is going to be a car question in here. Good luck with that one. But first off, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received and from whom? Who gave you that advice? And as you carry it with you, why does it mean so much?
I think the best piece of advice I ever got actually probably came from my dad. And as a kid, I was a worrier. I've always been a worrier. I would lay awake at night and we had a lot of things to worry about. So, there's a reason for it, but I would lay in bed at night, unable to sleep, just tossing and turning, just worrying and worrying. And my dad once said to me, the key to not worry is to control what you can. Wake up tomorrow, go control what you can, and then you just got to drop the rest of it. You just got to shake the rest of it off. You can only do what you can do. And there's no point in laying awake at 2:00 in the morning worrying about something that you can't make any progress on. Get up tomorrow, do what you can do, control the variables you can, and then, be at peace with where things fall. And I think that was really good advice.
Well, obviously our dogs, I don't know if you could hear them in the background, but the dogs felt like that was great advice as well. Okay. Number 2, what's your dream car? And have you ever driven it? Do you have it? How do you get it in your garage as a dream car?
So let me start by saying that I am driving a Mitsubishi Mirage. It is a 3-cylinder car, Charlie. Like I can accelerate faster on my bicycle than I can on my car. Like all the time, people will be behind me honking at stop signs. And I'm like, no, I'm flooring it, guys. I'm flooring it. Like the pedal is to the floor. I've got a lawnmower engine in my car. Like I am lucky if I can get it up above 65 miles an hour. It's very fuel efficient, but it is not a powerful vehicle. So dream car. You know what I wanted when I was in high school that I've never owned it because it's so impractical in Colorado would be a Ford Mustang GT. And it's not a good snow car, but I think that's it. I think I still want the same thing. Although my dad had an Alfa Romeo Spider, a 1969 Alfa Romeo Spider, and I would, yeah, and that was a really cool car. I take either one.
For not being a car person, 2 great choices, right? Like very, very, very practical, realistic dream cars there for sure. All right. Now, we as professional athletes have gotten to come through some pretty cool people circles and had some really interesting interactions. What's the coolest interaction you've ever had with someone? If it was a conversation or just someone you thought you'd never meet, or you were sort of surprised by how interesting and fun the conversation and interaction was.
You're good at these questions, Charlie. Like one of the first times, this is a side, but one of the first times we met, it was at a Novo Nordisk event for, people in different areas. And we were sitting in this room and you're like, when did you realize you first made it? And I was sitting in a room with you and I think Dominique Wilkins and some really, I mean, just some incredible people. And I was like, maybe right now, like, maybe this is the moment. Close interactions. I think my favorite interactions are actually not with famous people. My favorite interactions are just with like regular people who are living their lives. I used to write, I do some freelance writing, and I used to have an article, like a column called Spoke. And it was just people that I met on the road. And one of my favorites was a cab driver in Wisconsin who talked to me about how she used to get her daughter tickets to the ballet every single year because she never had any exposure to culture, and she understood as she got older how important that was. And it was just like this incredible conversation from one mom to another about wanting your kids to have things that you didn't. And I think those moments are the moments that I really hang on to.
No, that's awesome. Absolutely, completely true. And I just want to say again, thank you for coming on Speed Bumps, Becky. This unbelievable conversation. I knew some of what we talked about, but hearing the stories all the way throughout, and overcoming the challenges, and getting over those speed bumps and continuing to accelerate down the road, has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Where can people follow you, keep up to speed with what you're doing with Team Novo Nordisk and advocacy, ambassador work? Where can people find you in the world of the internet?
So I'm on social media. I'm on all the normal social media platforms. So you can certainly find me there. And I set everything to public. So all of my content is pretty widely available. But definitely follow Team Novo Nordisk on their platforms. We do a lot actually on YouTube. There's a documentary about the team that's out right now. And it's a fascinating look at what our athletes go through and how they're able to compete. So yeah, definitely. And they, promote all of my events and things like that too. So.
And we'll make sure to link all that in the show notes, so our audience can click on it and find you and find Team Novo Nordisk as well. And as a final thank you, really appreciate it. And I hope we get to catch up in person soon.
Yeah, definitely.